20 years in prison for genocide, 8 months in detention without trial, complete confiscation of every asset, every photograph, every piece of clothing. This wasn't the sentence for Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu. They were already dead. This was the punishment for their children. 3 adults who woke up as royalty on December 22, 1989, and went to sleep as the most hated people in Romania. One would die at 45 from liver failure behind bars. Another would die homeless, fighting to prove her parents were even buried where the government claimed. The third is still alive today, hiding in plain sight at 76 years old. But what actually happened to them in those first hours after the firing squad? The details are far more brutal than the execution itself. To understand why the nation wanted blood, you need to understand what the Ceaușescu children represented. For 24 years, Nicolae Ceaușescu ruled Romania like a medieval king. Citizens stood in bread lines for hours, families rationed electricity, temperatures in apartments dropped below freezing in winter. Meanwhile, Valentin, Zoya, and Nicu lived in palaces with imported goods, elite medical care, and access to their families' extensive art collections and personal libraries. While over 100,000 children suffered in state orphanages, 1 meal per day, freezing conditions, deaths from infections, the Ceaușescu children wanted for nothing. When the revolution erupted in December 1989, this wasn't just about removing a dictator. It was collective rage. Within hours of their parents fleeing the Central Committee building on December 22nd, all 3 children were arrested and charged with undermining the national economy and genocide. They weren't victims of the revolution, they were targets. But each child's fate would be shockingly different. Nicolae Ceaușescu was the youngest, the chosen one, groomed from birth to inherit his father's empire. He'd built a reputation as a violent playboy, excess, cruelty, absolute impunity. The crown prince who answered to no one. When Romanian television broadcast his arrest, the nation watched him appear on screen disheveled, face battered, clothes torn. This was intentional. The same revolution that promised fairness began staging something far darker, public humiliation, to send a message that would shake the entire country. His charges were specific: ordering firing on protesters in Timișoara, overseeing torture during the revolution, failure to follow orders, 20 years in prison for genocide. Behind bars, Nicu's body began to collapse. Years of alcoholism had destroyed his liver. Chronic cirrhosis ravaged him cell by cell. In 1992, authorities released him on medical grounds, not mercy, necessity. He was dying. 4 years later, in a Vienna hospital, Nicolae Ceaușescu died at age 45, the first sibling to fall. The crown prince who never wore the crown. His entire life had been defined by his father's shadow, and even in death, he couldn't escape it. The revolution wanted to remove them from power permanently. With Nicu, it succeeded. But his sister Zoya would face a different kind of torture, one that lasted far longer than any prison sentence. Zoya Ceaușescu was different. A mathematician, an intellectual who had spent years trying to distance herself from her parents' politics, building a career on equations and research rather than power. 8 months in detention, no trial, just waiting. When they finally released her in 1990, she walked out expecting to return to some version of her old life. Instead, she found nothing. The government had confiscated her apartment, all her assets, her research papers, her personal belongings. Everything stripped away while she sat in a cell. She was a mathematician with genuine expertise. She'd helped build the institute where she worked, but the revolution didn't care about credentials. Despite her qualifications, she was professionally blacklisted and barred from returning to her research post. The woman who once lived in palaces now survived on a small pension, relying on friends for basic necessities, near poverty. The intellectual erasure was complete. Her final years became consumed by a single obsession. The government claimed her parents were buried in Ghencea Cemetery, but Zoya doubted it. She launched legal battles to exhume the bodies, to prove where they actually lay. She never got her answer. Lung cancer killed her in 2006 before the bodies were finally identified and her questions resolved. 16 years of fighting for dignity. for truth, for something as simple as knowing where her parents were buried. While Zoya fought until her last breath, the eldest brother had already made a different choice: complete silence. Valentin Ceaușescu understood something his siblings didn't. Survival required invisibility. The eldest son, a nuclear physicist who had always kept his distance from the palace drama. When the revolution came, he was arrested like the others, charged with undermining the national economy and genocide. But the legal cases against him were weak. No specific crimes, no blood on his hands, no torture orders. In 1990, they let him go. Valentin made a decision that day. He retreated into near-total isolation in a modest suburb. No interviews, no public statements, no attempts to defend his family's legacy. But silence didn't mean surrender. For decades, he fought legal battles behind closed doors, not for power or recognition, but for something simpler. His family's seized art collections, their books, physical remnants of a life that had been erased, and his parents' bodies. In 2010, 21 years after the execution, Valentin finally won the right to exhume and rebury Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu, them with a formal marble grave, something Zoya had died trying to achieve. The public hatred had faded by then, not forgiven, but forgotten. Romania had moved on to new problems, new politicians, new scandals. Today, at 76 years old, Valentin Ceaușescu remains the last surviving member of the immediate family. He lives quietly under the radar, in obscurity. The man who learned the only way to survive being a Ceaușescu was to stop being one in public. His siblings fought, he disappeared, and that's what saved him. 3 children, 3 strategies, 3 completely different fates. What their stories reveal about revenge, justice, and legacy goes far deeper than any execution. 3 children, 3 completely different fates. But the pattern reveals something darker than simple justice. Nicolae's violent reputation destroyed him. 20 years for genocide, dead at 45 from cirrhosis. His crimes were real, ordering firing on protesters, overseeing torture in Timișoara. The revolution wanted to remove them from power permanently, and with him, it succeeded. Zoya's innocence didn't save her. A mathematician who tried to distance herself from politics still lost everything. Her home, her career, her dignity. 8 months in detention, then decades in poverty. Valentin's silence did. The nuclear physicist who understood that survival meant erasure. Weak legal cases collapsed. He retreated into near-total isolation after his 1990 release and became invisible. The revolution didn't just execute Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu on December 25, 1989. It erased an entire family. Romania's collective trauma demanded scapegoats, and the children, guilty or not, became targets of a nation's rage. Today, only one remains at 76 years old, living proof that surviving the Ceaușescu name required becoming someone else entirely. But the final question lingers. Was justice served? The Ceaușescu children paid for their parents' crimes in blood, poverty, and silence. Nicu died behind bars at 45. Zoya died homeless, her legal battles unfinished. Valentin survived by erasing himself completely. Today, at 76 years old, Valentin remains the last living witness to Romania's darkest chapter. A man who learned that carrying his family name meant becoming invisible. History's verdict is clear. During a revolutionary crisis when the leadership believed the old system had to be dismantled immediately, the revolution consumed everyone in its path. It couldn't allow enemies of the revolution to regroup.